My name is Justin Brophy, and this is my presentation for the Perception Cognition final. So I've titled this presentation Sensation and Being, and the reason it is titled as such is because sensation and being, I believe, are linked in that they are kind of the beginning and the end of the questions that are asked and kind of the search for knowledge regarding perception and cognition. Sensation is how we start, is okay, how do you perceive things? How does that affect your cognition? And I think the end and what's kind of at the core of that pursuit of understanding of perception and cognition is an understanding of being, of how do we experience being. So I chose Norman Rockwell's Freedom from Want painting, which was painted in 1942. It's also known by a couple other names, and colloquially is just a Thanksgiving painting. But I believe that this actually really does a good job of displaying what I want to talk about and displaying the themes that we've gone over throughout the semester and putting into one kind of artistic medium a lot of the questions as well as some answers to those questions regarding perception and cognition. So real quickly, this painting is out of order here, but it's put as the fourth. It's actually the third in a series of the Four Freedom. It's in the Four Freedoms series, which was a series of paintings that Rockwell did after FDR gave a speech regarding the four freedoms, which are from left to right: freedom of speech, freedom from fear, freedom of religion, and freedom from want. So why I chose this painting is just because it is packed full of sensory information. You see, obviously it's a visual medium, so you have the visual information. You're seeing faces, seeing objects, lighting, but even beyond that, like with you can kind of feel the atmosphere. You can hear the conversations. You can smell the food. You can even taste the food. And so it's a very, very good demonstration of an art form that kind of shows a lot of sensory information. And what's interesting about this is I can look at it and see something completely different from someone else, experience different senses. And that demonstration of how other people perceive perhaps the same painting differently, and they might perceive different senses, begins to bring up the big questions about perception and cognition and being that I want to talk about today, and that's why I've chosen this painting. So just to set the stage before we get into the painting, how do we experience existence? So existence or being, right, it's our experience of it is, I believe, fundamentally hinges on sensation, our ability to sense, because without those senses, and it starts with the five cardinal senses, without those five cardinal senses, you can't experience what I'll just call the higher senses, things like pain, emotion, both emotional and physical, distance, a sense of body, sense of space, and a sense of time. And really importantly, without those, again, I just kind of called them higher senses, you essentially can't actually experience being. Like a common phrase in psychology is stream of consciousness. Well, a stream is something that, and moves from one place to another, so there's distance, there's space, and it moves over time. I mean, if you had no ability to sense time or space, your existence would just be void. So I just want to kind of set the stage with that, is that the question of being starts with sensation, because sensation is absolutely necessary for our experience of being and of existence. So, this painting, Norman Rockwell's Freedom from Want, full of information. I would say it exhibits all 5 cardinal senses. So you have, the sight, obviously, of this picture here, but you also have kind of the smell. You can smell the food, you can taste the food, you can hear the conversations, even in this visual medium, and you can feel yourself being there, both physically kind of sitting at the table and also that more spatial understanding of being surrounded by people. And what's important for this, for the discussion of perception and cognition, is people perceive different things when they look at this. So that can be something as simple as the chief cardinal sense that you might see. So some people, the chief cardinal sense might be taste. You might really be able to kind of taste the food in this picture. For me personally, it's the audio. I can hear this picture. I can hear the young man in the back left kind of laughing. I can hear that the woman on the right and the boy just to my left are kind of having a conversation. I might not be able to pick up on it, but I can hear that they're having that conversation. I can hear the china and the silverware clattering in anticipation as people get ready to eat. And this difference in how people, the different perceptions that people have indicates that perception is obviously not something as simple as just the painting on the screen and the visual information. So that leads us to what this says about perception and cognition. And I've radically oversimplified here, but I think it's useful for this presentation. There's sort of 2 schools of thought on this perception and cognition and their relation to each other and to sensory information. And the first would be this kind of passive reaction, which is info processing and Gibsonian model. And that's where you just you're passively receiving information from the senses. And then in the information processing model, especially like a computer, you are just going to process that passively based on whatever information you got, and you're going to get a predictable outcome. And Gibson is a bit more complicated because his affordances are a bit like Aristotle's forms, but it's essentially the same idea that it's a passive process versus people like Nasir, Merleau-Ponty, and Vanderberg, and apologies if I butchered those names, take a more active approach where cognition or perception and cognition are actively linked with one another and actually affect one another, affect with an A. And I've chosen this word here kind of to co-influence. So you have whatever you're perceiving is influencing your cognition of that thing. And your cognition of that thing, how you think about it, is going to also change and affect how you perceive whatever sensory information, because the sensory information is coming in, there are passive processes involved, but the actual perception of it is active. And the question that this brings up, again, we're kind of moving up in the stages of these questions, is if perception, cognition based initially on sensory information, perception and cognition is how we experience being. Is it active or is it passive? Are we active in our own being, or are we just passively being acted on and then spitting out appropriate and predictable results? So here's a little graphic, and this is actually not entirely active because, or not entirely accurate, because just on the right we see what is meant to represent active processing. It's not so much that you're changing what, like for instance, visual stimuli, like the actual photons coming in, it's that you're changing how you perceive it. So this is just a little graphic of active versus passive. So I believe that this picture, this painting, actually gives a really good kind of understanding and a good argument for the Merleau-Ponty kind of active process of perception and cognition, which then is an answer to, are we actively or passively existing? And while this is my obviously personal opinion, I do want to say that I think Ponty provides a much better argument. And so to kind of set up this argument, the painting that Rockwell did was made from individual photographs. So first he photographed each of these people in the painting. He photographed them, and then he painted the painting as one painting from all these different photographs. Now, there's an argument to be made in there about something, an information processing model where he's taking all those photographs and he's simply, looking at them and then painting the combination of all of them. But I think that what this painting really kind of displays is the Ponty model, where he's looking at, he looks, at a photograph, and that perception, as Ponty would say, like as soon as you can't have perception without essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, but actively acting on whatever that perception is via cognition. So I think that this painting shows that a lot, because he has really, and just viscerally, you can see a lot of detail and a lot of sensory information in the painting. And I think that that's all coming from Rockwell essentially actively perceiving those pictures. And by doing so, he has, he's actively affecting the picture to then create the image, the mental image of the person that he wants in the painting, and then he's painting that. So, and again, my personal opinion in that last part, that I think that painting is showing kind of an active processing model of perception and cognition. But to kind of sum that up and to take that to where what that tells us about being and sense perception in the human life is that by that active model, which again, my opinion that's correct, we're affected by the world through our senses. So because we perceive the world through our senses, and because perception is actively working on cognition, they're co-influencers of each other. Therefore, our cognition is actively affected by essentially everything around us, by anything which which stimulates our senses. Likewise, though, this actually, and this is kind of trying to give at least a partial answer to some of the big questions posited in this video, is our cognition can co-influence our perception the same way our perception can influence our cognition, then we have the ability to actively affect the world that we live in. Because that world that we live in is just whatever sensory information, right? Like that's how we're interacting with it. That's how we are experiencing being. That's how we experience the isness, which is being. If it's an active model, then our cognition has can actively affect and change the world we live in. So then just to kind of summarize again and give a final wrap up, chose this image because I think it shows that it demonstrates the importance of perceptual integration and how our perception, our cognition co-influence each other. And because different people see different things in this, kind of coming back to the beginning, it demonstrates how that active model, how we can change our world that we live in through our cognition.